Hey, good morning, everybody. It's Mike from Sapulpa Times coming to you with a very special episode. I'm sitting here with Kirby Davis. Kirby is the
Howdy.
author of a new book, set of books actually, that we
Called The
call
Great
The
Beckoning.
Great Beckoning, and we're going to get into the title of that also. But it has been quite a while since we've had some books. The last one that I remember, it's books about Sapulpa's history. The last one that I recall was Don Deal. He wrote like a photographic type of pictorial type history, and that was several years ago. But now we've got two brand new books under the Great Beckoning banner have come out, and they're actually both available now. We're going to tell you about how to get to them. But we tried to do this interview last week, had some
Mhm.
issues with the camera and everything, so we're moving it to now. But Kirby, thanks so much for sitting down with me. I do appreciate
Well,
it.
thank you for having me.
Yeah,
This
we're
is going to
happy
be
to do
fun.
it, man. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. We could literally sit here and just talk for hours about Sapulpa's history, and I know you've got a lot to say about it.
Well,
Um, judging by just the conversation we had last week. But let's start from the very beginning. So I know that there's a specific reason why these books came out now and not like at the beginning of the year or later or however. So let's talk about that. Why now?
now because they were finally done. It was, I mean, we had hoped to have them done sometime this spring. We were open about it because we knew it's a multi-part series of events that we're planning to celebrate the centennial of Route 66. The
Right.
first one was the start of the Sepulpa's Great Route 66 giveaway, where we collected chunks uh, for I collected chunks for for seemingly months, but it was actually only about 6 weeks. But we're giving three of those away each week through the entire year. We thought one way to continue the momentum would be, as spring started, to release the paperbacks and then the hardcovers. And then we would follow up in the fall with a new product from Spolpa Main Street, a collectible can series annual release that would give them a money stream going forward that would grow in value. Start that at the blowout. And then at the end of the year, we had an idea that we're still working on that we hope to pull off. But the issue with the books was I foolishly said I could get them done in about 3 months, and it actually took about five. And so, they were running through, and then starts the correction phase, which always takes me a while. So we were fortunate, I think, to get them out now, and we still kind of fit our spring format that we were targeting.
Yeah.
Uh, so we're happy with it. And then they both became bestsellers at Amazon, so that was an unexpected blessing.
Well, I don't know if it was all that unexpected. I think that's just awesome. I mean, but
Well,
I, for me, that would have been a bestseller, obviously, because this is Sepulpa.
well, you got to keep in mind Amazon is a worldwide retailer.
Right.
So for something to hit the list can require a lot of sales. On the other hand, and here's what I keep reminding people, Amazon, unlike the days when I was a kid, and somewhat when you were a kid, when I was a kid, you had, for example, in music, you had maybe three charts:
Hmm.
rock or pop, easy listening, and country. Now you have a chart for every single style of music there possibly is. Amazon is the same way. With every product, they break it down to the nuances of the heart of that project. So when I say we had a bestseller, well, on the chart, The History of Railroads, we were the number one new release, and I believe we're still number two after a week and a half.
Wow.
And that's another change. In for many generations, you may have had one release update a month or one a week. Amazon now updates their lists, every few hours, charting ongoing sales at the time. So, it's to make it, we made it on some very small lists, like the history of railroads, but we also made a top new release on the history of the United States, local and state, which was a pretty large list. of books. So I felt very good about it all. And they're still floating around in the upper levels of some of these lists, which is cool.
That's really cool, and I think it's neat that you can say that it's been on this list and that list. I'm sure that probably helps the ego booster, if nothing else. But um,
Well, there's certainly that. There's certainly that.
well, so I mean, congratulations again on getting the books done because I think it's a great achievement, but it's always I love seeing it when we get new material on Sapulpa's history because it
Well,
seems like there's something new in every book that comes out, and I've got several of them on my shelf here. We were just talking about that. But what I really appreciated about this one, especially the first book, that's the one that I've read so far. I just finished it over the weekend,
what do you
and
think about it?
oh, I loved it. Yeah, of course I did. But I really appreciated that you spent a good amount of time in the beginning talking about the history of the Native Americans and how they got to here, and I mean all the way back from the
1720.
yeah the founding days of our country. Yeah, and
Well, that's vital because I mean, let's start with the fact that we're named Sapulpa.
right.
We're
Yeah.
named Sapulpa based on a Creek Indian named Sapulpa who decided to settle here. People generally think around 1850, and he recognized, or else he wouldn't have started with a store, but he certainly recognized there was a traffic potential there
Hmm.
based probably on the natural trail that was identified back into the Louisiana Purchase days when U.S. Scouts, when we acquired the land from France, and U.S. Scouts went through looking for ways, the best ways, to get to the West Coast. Because even then, their dreams were California and the Pacific.
Even in the
Even in those
1700.
early days, they were
Okay.
already, and that's not that hard to imagine when you realize that from the colonial days, they were spreading west rather quickly. You remember the stories of Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett.
Right.
Daniel Boone was at the turn of the century, not 20 years into the nation's existence,
Okay.
so, and he ended up in Missouri, halfway through into the continent by the time he died. And by then, of course, we'd already had Louisiana Purchase, and we were already looking beyond the Rockies.
Hmm.
Lewis and Clark had already made it to the Pacific, during Jefferson's presidency, and he was number three on our list. So
Wow.
we had a
I never heard
long
that.
dream of what came to be known as manifest destiny. We think of the words "Go West, young man" as something from an editor who um, debated through the newspapers with President Lincoln, but the drive to the West was there almost from the beginning. You can even read it into the colonial language written into the setting of the colonies, where there was no Western boundaries put on a lot of the states. So it was their agreement to set off to put an ending on their states to the West to allow more states to come up. That
Never
that was
considered
part of the
that actually.
drive west.
That's awesome. Well, so you spent a good amount of time, like a couple of chapters at least, I think, just kind of laying out how we even got here. Sapulpa got here roughly 1850, like you said.
Well, he was there before then. That's when the store was set up,
Okay, that's when
and
the
his
store was.
farm that followed. Yeah,
And the store actually, I mean, it didn't. I thought for some reason that the store lasted until the town really got started, but he actually closed it, I think, twice, didn't he?
he opened it and closed it because the traffic just wasn't there, but also because of the getting materials was so difficult to keep up with.
Hmm.
With his first store, he was actually traveling all the way to Muskogee and even further and back to get his
To get the
materials. And the
supplies.
line
Yeah.
and the land wasn't as populated. It wasn't hardly populated at all at that point. So there was a lot of danger to that. And then after the Civil War, when we knew the trains were coming,
Hmm.
he tried it again. And again, he fell back on his farming and ranching because he was a successful farmer and rancher. There's He probably didn't need the heartache and the stress of that. And it's also often forgotten that after his second store, it wasn't too long before another storekeeper came, in that area. And then others followed. It was a slow build because the railroad, as it finally came, ran into negotiations and actually stopped at Sapulpa. It was a dead end for about a decade. So, we often forget that too because of
Yeah.
the railroad's success afterwards. But, it's a fascinating story that had a lot of stop and goes and question marks along the way.
Yeah. It's really kind of neat to look at it, 100 years later, 125 years later, where we are now, and see these pivotal moments where Sapulpa took a turn and how much differently things could have ended up had something gone differently. And of course, you mentioned the railroad, and that I think takes up the bulk of this first book is the railroad leading up to what you call the Great Divorce of 1928, right?
Yeah.
And for those who aren't familiar, of course, Sapulpa was the end of the tracks town for a long time, but we were like the commercial hub for this particular railroad.
That was the most important part. Yes, we were the end of the tracks, but that was just a period from the mid 1880s into the 1890s through that period. So it was actually over a decade. But let me take that back. Um, there was desire for that line to be extended over many other parts of the state, and it finally happened in the mid 1890s as the Frisco was in bankruptcy, that a pair of Oklahoma City investors built a rail line from there to Sapulpa and then sold it to the Frisco when they got out of bankruptcy.
Right.
And that gave them the reemphasis to, to spread west. And we're forgetting a part of this too. The Frisco was an example of the which actually started during the Civil War, of the United States government moving to help railroads go west by charting them and giving them financial aid in that. And the Frisco was one. Let me take that back. The drive through Sapulpa was one that started at the end of the Civil War, when Congress set up, just after the end of the Civil War, set up and authorized a railroad to go through Indian Territory to hit Southern California. That was a long desired goal, to connect that. A railroad to another name started it, but it went under rather quickly. Frisco then bought it, worked under its name for a while, came in to Sapulpa, and got tied up in some negotiations with tribes and other issues, financial. And in the meantime, two other railroads actually made it to Southern California. So therefore, the emphasis that was behind the Sapulpa line went away,
Okay.
which is one reason why the ownership started looking at growth in Texas or in other areas
Hmm.
instead of pursuing on to Oklahoma City. And that's why that happened until the Oklahoma City people built the line for them
Right.
and then sold it to them. But we often forget that drive to the west was even down to the congressional mandate that led them to enter Indian Territory, and to the consternation of the local tribes who didn't necessarily want their land pierced and settled by white people.
Right. Yeah. That's I can only imagine what they might have thought as they saw
Another betrayal, probably.
yeah, another in a long line. But so okay, so keeping on with kind of the history happening here, the railroad shows up, becomes I think by far the largest employer in town. And that becomes evident whenever they start having conversations about Tulsa. By that time the Glen pool has been discovered, and in fact a lot of that wealth and stuff that was associated with that starts moving to Tulsa. And actually, a lot of ways, I think it takes some time, but it eventually starts to siphon kind of out of Sapulpa, and some of that moves to Tulsa. I'm curious, and we talked about this before, but I think it's good to put it on camera here. What do you think? First of all, we're closer to Glenpool than Tulsa was, I think.
Uh,
So geographically, so why was Sapulpa not able to take better advantage of that, do you
Well,
think?
that's one thing that Pete Egan addressed in his books. As he noted, Sapulpa never had the financial resources that Tulsa did, and they never would.
Mm,
Um, and that is vital. Capital cash flow is vital to any investment and any development of a business resource. Oil, just one perfect example of how
Yeah.
much it cost to drill a well, to bring the oil up, to deliver it somewhere. And we also forget that just like today, back then the economy would go through ebb and flows. And anytime that flow went down and you didn't have great capital resources, it opened the doors for someone who did to come in and buy, usually at a discount, whatever operations or resources that you're working on at that time.
Yeah.
And the
We
people
saw that.
locally appreciate that because it keeps them going.
Right.
But
But
it
there's
also
also some
means control gets,
consolidation and stuff between.
yes.
Yeah.
And Tulsa did that not just with Sapulpa, but kind of much of eastern Oklahoma, northeastern Oklahoma. But
Yeah.
Sapulpa was remembered as a target here because of all the things we saw go there. But as Pete noted, we never were a center of oil and gas management.
Even though we were
We did a
the
lot of the
oil
work
city of the
here, but
Southwest or whatever.
we were, well, that was based on production.
Okay.
Even after the headquarters, whatever limited ones there were here, moved to Tulsa, the Sapulpa papers into the 1910s noted how the Glenpool area in Creek County in particular was the leading oil production source for the state of Oklahoma. So while Tulsa would be the oil capital in terms of management and cash flow, the crude coming out of the ground was most productive in Creek County due to the Glenpool. And that was true for a long time.
Okay. Well, thanks for that clarification there, that explanation. I think a lot of people like me have always wondered, like, um, why it went the way it did, I guess. But I mean, it's kind of easy to understand once you see the reasons why behind it. Now, um, going back to the railroads there, I recall, and this became really prevalent towards the end of the book, um, is that there was ample opportunity here for the railroads to expand. I think they were considering that, and then, but it looks like the thing they kept running up against was they were basically landlocked. There was really nowhere to go.
One thing that the books point out is Sapulpa, according to some of his, as shared by some of his relations in the first two Sapulpa books, we are blessed by a wealth of historical records put out by the Sapulpa Historical Society.
Yes, we
They
are.
put two books out in the 80s, and one of them goes into this point. You know, he settled in an area that was kind of ringed by hills.
Yeah, a natural
It
bowl
was
kind of.
suggested
Yeah.
that it was maybe a protection against tornadoes. Maybe it was. But it also followed a natural trail through those hills. As the railroad came in and settled in what became the northern part of Sapulpa, in other words, if you turn that around, the railroad came in and the town developed primarily on the southern side of the railroad, starting with the commercial access and then the feeding of that, which was from Hobson to Dewey,
Hmm.
and then an insulator road, Lee, where the government and the churches were, and then residential.
Right.
And then as it grew from that, residential grew both to the west and to the east. Well, the railroad, as it developed the Oklahoma City line and then added a Texas line in 1901, both of which did well, Sapulpa was rewarded by its construction base growing into what was called a district point, which was like a regional center for both commercial and business traffic. With that came warehouses, with that came associated businesses, agriculture, oil and gas shipping, a refinery or two, all sorts of things because they would needed the railroad for transit. So they formed there. Plus the fact the railroad grew rather quick time from one lane to two lane up to 14 wide. Now, what made it landlocked was that you had hills on one side and then the city on the other.
Hmm.
And that grew up, the city grew up to the south, which meant that a lot of the wide plain in that bowl was where people settled. North of the rails was the line of hills that we can still see that the turnpike goes through. In fact, if you may remember from reading the books, to help settle this, the city in around 1903 cut off traffic of Main Street going north of
North,
the
yeah.
railroads,
Hmm.
and that lasted for 50 some years.
And
Now,
so,
in modern Sapulpa now, when you get at that corner of Main and Hobson and you're traveling north, you see the big incline of the hill in front of you.
mhm,
That was the landlocked Sapulpa that the railroad faced. They couldn't grow south because the city was there. And the further they widened that field north, with all the sporting businesses, they were going up an incline. Now, and that they could still do that. Pete even mentioned this once. But the challenge there is the fact that there were other areas like Tulsa that said, hey, our land is flat.
yeah, we got all this
All that
over here.
savings that you're looking at spending in Sapulpa, you don't have that cost here. And furthermore, as the relationship grew and the city grew, they ran into issues of how do you work with each other. And one of the issues in the 20s that rose that was a problem was getting across the tracks. The city wanted either a viaduct, they got one, but they were thinking of one across the entire width. That's one big bridge.
Yeah,
And
would be.
some even suggested digging under, which would have been incredible cost at that time. City wanted the Frisco to pay for all of it. The
Right,
Frisco was willing to go 50-50, or at
right.
least they said so. And they never ever really settled that issue. And that was just one of many. The primary issue, though, was land and then clean water. For as the railroads developed, the technology got better. And as often happens with technology, the things that you work with need to be purer, cleaner, more efficient. Water that wasn't pure or had salt or other ingredients could decay the steam engine components faster than clean water would, which would just go up in steam and you reclaim it.
Yeah.
Sapulpa always had challenges providing enough clean water. Now, to be fair, so did Tulsa. But
Yeah, Tulsa actually, I mean, the residents were on bottled water
they
at
were
a
on
point, right?
bottled water until they built the Spavinaw system in 19 started I believe in 1921 after the race riots. They finally approved it, finished like in 23. A $7 million project back then. That was, if we had a inflation calculator, that would be incredibly expensive
I
today,
bet it would
dollar.
be. Yeah.
But once Pete wrote in his books that, I'm going to paraphrase it, but he wrote that was, he thought, ultimately the final issue. When Tulsa was able to open that up and have plentiful, almost unlimited clean water, that was probably the final straw in the Frisco's mind that led them a few years later to do what they did.
Uh,
It's
well, okay, so just touching back on that just a bit before we kind of wrap this up for the first book, is that it was neat to watch all this play out because I had no idea that actually Sapulpa went to court over this with Frisco and tried to get him to come back. And court actually sided with Sapulpa for a little bit, right?
Well, that's a detailed. This gets into the heart of the issue. I like to point to that what I call the divorce of 28.
Hmm.
But the issue really started a decade before then,
Oh, they were
when
part of it. Okay.
Tulsa was already, as they had, as you mentioned when you started this, about Tulsa's desire to gobble up other businesses and have them for their own. They had moved on the Frisco in some cases as early as 1903, but they made a big drive in the teens, just as we were entering the World War I period. And at one point, the Frisco went through another bankruptcy, and when it came out in 1916, they came out with a plan that they would move the district point of Sapulpa's to Tulsa, but they would substitute and give Sapulpa a, a car reconstruction
Yeah, like a maintenance or
Yeah,
something, right?
well, it was something for their. I didn't forgive me because I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was something for the rebuilding of the coaches
Okay.
and maintenance and restructuring it. And they said that it was going to help replace and more than fulfill and replace what was already here. But by that time, the people of Sapulpa didn't trust the new management of the railroad.
Right.
They liked what they had. They didn't want to necessarily gamble in the future. And so being a city that, as we didn't mention, but through that early part, they were the second fastest growing city in the nation to Tulsa,
Of
which was
course.
number one.
Right. Yeah.
But they had power in this new state that was just reaching its first decade of prominence. And they went to the legislature, and within a month, were able to get through there and signed by the governor a bill that said any railroad office 5 years old or older that wanted to move had to go to the corporation commission to prove their point for moving and get their permission.
Hmm.
Corporation commission told the Frisco no. They took the legal battle all the way to the Supreme Court, which sided with the state, a sovereignty issue. And at that point, the Frisco really didn't fight it further because the United States was in this political wave from the events going that carried us into World War One. And indeed, over the next 5 years, the Frisco invested heavily again in Sapulpa. But then through the 20s and the prosperity of that era and the challenges of that society and the changes that were going on in the culture,
Yeah.
visions again formed, and then we get to what we were talking about there. Again, the Frisco decided to fight it legally. They took this case this time with a start at the Tulsa Federal Court, which ruled in their favor that this was not a state commerce issue, but an interstate commerce issue, which is overseen by the federal government. And they allowed the Frisco enough leeway that overnight in February of 27 or 8, they came in with a train and their equipment. And overnight, they ripped up everything but 2 lanes of rails.
Hmm.
And they took the stops out of town and moved it all to West Tulsa.
Yeah.
The state, through the Corporation Commission, fueled on by the city, fought that and took it to the Supreme Court and won states' rights.
Right.
The city immediately forced or pushed for the Frisco to go back for the Corporation Commission, which naturally upheld its own decisions, held them in contempt, and ordered them to take everything back. The Frisco fought it in the courts for over a year. Finally came back before the U.S. Supreme Court. In December of 28th, they heard it for a month. All the reasons, the business reasons, the financial reasons, the cultural reasons why the Frisco said they were better where they were. And keep in mind, one of their arguments by then was not just landlocked, not just water, but Tulsa by then was 10 times the size of Sapulpa, with all the business the Frisco had thought they would get to the Sapulpa, and they wanted to stay there.
Yeah. And
And and
I think
in
they said they'd save, the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of dollars a year by staying there, things like that.
and in January 29, the Supreme Court agreed with them,
Okay.
and
And
so therefore the battle pretty much ended. Now it took a couple years for all the subsidiary businesses that superior is not the right word. The parasitical businesses that relied on the railroad for a lot of their operations. It took a few years for them to slowly move to Tulsa. Some of them rather quickly. They gave the workers time to relocate, which was probably not only a nice move, but reflections of the stock market crash and the depression that followed not long thereafter.
yeah.
But Sapulpa at that point lost all the high paying jobs, over 1,000 workers. They lost all the community efforts that the Frisco did. They lost all the businesses that were there because of the Frisco, or most of them, and the prestige, all the train stops, all the people on either commercial or just civilian travel who would stop there and eat there, spend the hotel night there, whatever, all gone.
Yeah. It was uh, it just came to me as you were saying this. This is kind of the Infinity War of the the two books, I guess. If you got the Marvel Infinity War and then Endgame, and it ends on kind of a downer. But
I saw it more as a cliffhanger in writing the
yeah,
books.
well,
I mean,
it was a good
because the thing
way
is,
to.
it's Tulsa gives as it takes away. What happened was, the initiative is still a debate over who really started Route 66. Springfield claims it with legitimate claims. Tulsa claims it with legitimate claims. But because of Tulsa, we had Route 66 started, officially approved in November 1926. Just slowly developing by the time the railroad catastrophe happened, if you want to look at it that way. So, and there's I end book one with a quote from the Sapulpa Herald, a front page editorial, after announcing the Supreme Court decision, challenging the people of Sapulpa. What are they going to do? Are they going to let this put them down? Or are they going to rise up
Yeah,
and stand on their 2 feet and go forward? And, at that time, a lot of people realized that the train, even though they were founded on the railroads and for 100 years this nation had built on the railroads, it didn't take 20 years of upstart work by the motorless carriage, the automobile, the truck, to make people realize this is going to change society. And
right.
they had the potential crossroads of America because it wasn't just Route 66. There was also US 75 planned going north south through Sapulpa. So it was this issue. Yes, it's a crossroads, it's a turning point, but the Herald was asked him, are we worse off really or are we better? In many ways. Are
Yeah,
we going to stand on our own 2 feet? They even quoted a biblical line, you're going to be this hill that lets its light shine.
yeah. I thought that was
And
very fitting for Sapulpa being a city on a hill like we are. Yeah,
that's where book one ends, although there are two appendices that provide all this background information, which is kind of fun.
which is what I'm working my way through right now,
Very
and
cool.
enjoying it still. And yeah, and so I mean, it's been about a half an hour now that we've been talking about this, but this is just. I feel like we're barely scratching the surface
Well,
of
we haven't even
everything.
talked about book two,
Yeah,
except we've
that's it.
mentioned Route 66, and book two to fully
Let's see.
explain that issue, because book one, even though it talked about the starting of roads and paving, because that was part of the city development, book two is where you really look at why the automobile was going to play the role that it did, and how even at the local level, um, people were starting to dream of the freedoms that came with a pair of wheels that you just, of course, it wasn't that easy to start today as then. The automobiles functioning were more difficult, but it was night and day compared to that, to saddling your horse and taking your beloved animal into town, what you do with them while they're there, and then coming back, or whether you're going to walk through the dust and the mud and everything else. All that challenge of where we were going and how it would change culture. That leads into book two.
And that's the one I have yet to get. But both of these are available on Amazon, right?
Yep.
So okay, and they can be
Book
found.
two, book two is came out three some days after book one, purely because it's just the way we did it.
Well, I was curious if there was sometimes somebody will release your first book and then your next book won't come out till a year later or months later or
That was
something.
traditionally was the way you always did it, because, but again, those ages were different then, and for example, in those old traditional days, hardcover first, and then a year later, when the market saturated, paperback,
Hmm.
much cheaper.
You got
Today, you will find
different.
people who publish both at the same time, not
Yeah.
just on uh, entrepreneurs like what we're doing, but even mainstream hardcovers you'll find coming out with a paperback right alongside it, because they realize in these economic times that uh, incomes are challenged, uh, cash flow can be dicey at sometimes, and they would rather make the sale even on the lower cost paperback
Hmm.
than not have a sale at all. It
Okay.
and
And
and books have a smaller window now than they used to, and quite frankly, fewer people are reading.
yeah.
So it's an industry in transition, but then most of our world is with this digital age. So
Yeah, we're all kind of learning how to get along in the new world that we're in, but
we're talking on video right now instead of the written word, where people would be getting this message spread over articles over days,
right.
probably.
Yeah, now they get it
Now,
all in one half hour, 40-minute interview. So, to start with, I mean, we'll probably be talking more in the future as well. But um, so you mentioned that you're doing a hardback, or that some folks do a hardback, and I think there's still plans to produce a hardcover
oh yeah,
later on,
oh yeah.
and like full color and stuff like that, right?
That's a whole new story we're opening up production of
Okay.
the books, which if you want to dive into it. But yeah, the issue is I did the paperback because I have been doing this for a long time, and this was considered the inexpensive, affordable entry level book. We have a commercial artist who you guys probably all know, Brent Fowler,
Yeah. Yeah. I know her.
and this idea started with her actually doing the Route 66 book.
Really.
Oh yeah, I just jumped in and said, "Yeah, I can do that." You know, which was
Well,
a
it take 3 months.
well, that was that's a whole nother story for a whole nother interview, and it's actually a very fun story. But the thing is, as backed up as I am, she's infinitely more. So she's still working on the hardcover, and she has. I don't know how much of this to talk about. She's working on it right now, in fact, amid other projects.
Okay.
There's the possibility it might come out later this year.
Okay.
There's a possibility it might be next year. You know, we've decided not to rush this because she wants to do something really special, full color, hardcover, coffee table type book,
Hmm.
the book that you treasure.
Yeah.
And she's going to get it right, and then we'll release it, and then maybe we'll look a couple of years down the road at annotated versions of both of the books, and
I'd
again,
love to see all
paperback
that.
and hardcover. So, well, for example, these books right now, they're meant to be fast, easy reads.
And they are. Yeah.
And so, for example, you get to the Louisiana Purchase, you get to the U.S. Civil War, you get to issues that we assume the reader knows, so we don't really explain them at all. But we're thinking about it, once a few years down the road, maybe doing an annotated version where we maybe fill in the holes for
Yeah. Expand
everyone.
some things a little bit,
Well,
right?
have a reference where if you don't know the Civil War, you can look back here in the pages and get it.
Okay.
And maybe more art. For example, one thing we really wanted but just couldn't find in time were actual. The Muskogee Creek Nation was gracious in allowing us a few photos that they had and some maps, and we reprint them and credit them. But we were also hoping to get, for example, drawings, paintings of events that you referred to from 1720 through the movement and the Trail of Tears to where Sapulpa ended up in Oklahoma.
Okay.
And many of those are just very difficult to get. And then, of course, you have to have copyright for them when you do.
Right.
So we're still working on that. We may have some for the hardcover. We may not have any until we get to the annotated versions a few years down the road. We may be still searching for them then. But those are part of the challenges of doing all
Of
of
doing this
this.
type of a project. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to say, I don't want to discourage anybody to wait around to get the hardcover. I would say if you're like me and you have a love and a desire for this town, go ahead and get the paperback now. They're both available on Amazon. And I forget the prices though.
$9.99.
Oh, yeah, very
And we
inexpensive.
will have some local people stocking in because of their extra costs. They might raise the price a little bit,
Yeah,
but yeah, we wanted to keep it affordable because we wanted as many people to read this as possible because it's important history.
it's important, but
I
just
refer to it as one
good.
of the little known stories of the American West that many people still don't know. And it's I thought it was I always think it's fascinating the things I've uncovered through all this or learned through that. Uncovered's a bad word because a lot of it was as we mentioned before, written and supplied and backed up by earlier members of the Historical Society,
Hmm.
earlier uh, newspapers that were printed at the time, at the era. But many of those resources people have difficulty reaching, or others, and we wanted to make them more accessible. And we wanted to make them more understandable and an easy read was one of the words we were using, something that would people would enjoy and come back to many times. And we hope we accomplished that.
Yeah. I certainly with the first book, I can guarantee that you've accomplished that from my own perspective because I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was able to read it over just a few days. It didn't take long at all, and that was a start and stop kind of deal. I was able
Mhm.
to put it down and come back to it and pick it up pretty easily. Um, so both books are available on Amazon. Go ahead and go get them now while you can. I don't know if there's like a limited supply or anything like that.
Oh no, no,
Not that
they'll
may.
they'll print more if they it's called print on demand.
Yeah.
So they can pump them out as long as you keep ordering them. And the more we orders we have, the best the chance will rise back up in the ranks. And we're hoping through that not just people in Sapulpa or eastern Oklahoma, but we're hoping people in this uh, cross country Route 66 centennial period that we'll find markets from Chicago to LA, and then all the people who visit us from other countries, other states. And, in many ways, this will be Sepulpa tourism. This will spread the word that this little community here has so many things to experience through this history,
Right.
through its culture, through its downtown, which predates Route 66 in many ways, and the background of our Indian territory status, our wilderness status, and going forward, our high tech status, the oil stories that you mentioned. We're hoping that these books play a role in helping introduce more and more people here, helping grow our community, helping spread the word that this is just a wonderful place to see and be and experience with a history that may only be 150 years old, but is vibrant, engaging, and quite satisfying to study and look at.
Yeah.
With
Very
many,
satisfying.
many sad stories, many horrible stories, but it's also a story about how you overcome all of that and rise up and go forward, which is what we're doing now.
I think this book in particular encapsulates that really, really well. I mean, you see a several periods of time where Sapulpa things didn't go well, and we were facing a lot of the same challenges that other places all around the country were. Through stock market crash and the depression and everything like that, which is going to be, I think, more so in the next book, right? In the
The
start of the second
depression
book.
is primarily in book two. Book
Okay.
two starts by going back to the rise of the motorless carriage and how it became a part of society, how Sapulpa started building towards that, the role Sapulpa played in that, which, as many people forget, the issue of the motor carriage, while it is a very, very interesting invention and development, the heart of that was the highway network. Because if you didn't build that, there's nowhere with this place to
Nothing.
go.
Right.
And the fact that we built the highway network we did in 100 years, is just fascinating.
Yeah.
And we complain about all the concrete now, forgetting about all the benefits that it provides in terms of transportation, in terms of connecting, in terms of getting together, in terms of building culture, in terms of effective government, commerce. I mean, the list of benefits from our highway network goes on and on.
Yeah, your book, I will say, give me a bit of a renewed appreciation for the highway that we have now, and just having gone through the 10 months of a waiting period that we had to get this Route 66 section here redone, and what of a pain that was. I'm still thinking, well, goodness, I mean, it was easy compared to what they had to endure back in the day. So,
Well, that's one thing that you'll get about in book two. I mean, it's not just the growth and birth of the auto and the highway, but how they improved them over time, and why Route 66 needed to be replaced over time and bypassed, and yet the damage that bypassing did to towns like Sapulpa. I mean, you talked about I was marveling too at the amount of time it took just to do 4 blocks of road.
Right.
You know, one thing that comes up in book two is when the state finally, after World War II, decided to give turnpikes a try, and the first one they built bypassed Sapulpa's and Route 66 between Tulsa and Oklahoma City to the detriment of all those people. There was also the benefit that turnpike gave to all the people commuting between the two. But to your point, you know, they started that interstate in 51 and finished it in 53.
Yeah.
All that, the bridges, the road, everything, 4 lanes divided,
2 years.
and then, but it was totally different environments, totally different construction things,
Hmm.
you know, and building, you know, 3.5 blocks, redoing 3.5 blocks in a historically protected area where commerce goes on every day while they're doing the
Yeah, it's a
work.
different.
All the infrastructure under that they can't disturb and have to protect and everything. And, you know, it's a totally different situation.
It is. Yeah.
And we take a lot of this stuff for granted, just waiting. When's it going to be done? When's it going to be done? Forgetting just how difficult it was,
Yep.
and how much they had to watch out for and do carefully. And then things like the rain.
Yeah, of course, the rain is a whole other situation. Well, God, we've gone pretty long here on this, but I promise you there is much more to be discovered in these books. I'm going to bring the covers back up. So we've got The Great Beckoning, which we didn't talk about this. I wanted to ask you why did you call it The Great Beckoning,
Virginia
Kirby?
Woolf, a journalist from Sapulpa's earlier period, I think Donald worked with her actually, and I know he did, in the 1990s. She was a longtime journalist here. And in a quote in talking about the growth of Sapulpa, she used the phrase a great beckoning, which I quote in book one. And I thought that's a wonderful explanation of how Sapulpa overcame all these things to do
Hmm.
what it did, not just in those early days or what brought people there, but continued today. So I called it The Great Beckoning to have because it really is just one book. We divided it into two because we have two organizations working with us. We'll have to come back and talk about that whole process again.
Yep. We
But
will.
because we have two organizations working with us, one published half and the other published half. So the Sapulpa Historical Society published book one, working with Sapulpa Main Street. Sapulpa Main Street published book two, working with the Sapulpa Historical Society. And they're working together to present the books to everyone. And they will continue to do that because we have the hardcovers coming out. We have joint box versions that we're doing. We're looking at annotated versions a few years down the road.
It's going to be good.
It, you know, it's a wonderful blessing and example of these two organizations, both to the mutual benefit, working together for the benefit of downtown and for Sapulpa in general.
Yep. And it's working well. And one other thing that you guys are doing kind of in the same time that you're doing all of this, I wanted to go ahead and mention the Great Route 66 giveaway because you're literally about to leave to go do one of
We're
those.
having one today at 11 o'clock at the Historical Society, which today, I don't know what time it is, but at 10 o'clock they open and they're debuting a new Route 66 exhibit. And that's,
I'm heading there right after we get done here
there you
to
go.
go check it out. Yeah.
And that's just, you know, and Main Street, meanwhile, is working on several projects ongoing right now, including some I wish we could talk about. But before the end of the year, they'll be out in, you know, additions to the blowout, the cans that we talked about,
Right.
collectible cans, limited edition. Um, they're both very active organizations, you know, and it's been fun and a blessing to work with them and can to look forward to it, hopefully for years to come. Yeah.
Well, so you've got more giveaways happening with the Great Route
Oh
66
yeah,
giveaway,
we're doing 3 a week,
3 a week.
but
Okay.
this week we have 4.
Okay. All right. Well, that makes
But
sense.
yeah, we have 3 a week through the end of this year.
Okay.
So we're hoping, you know, maybe on the last day of the shoot to have a big party, maybe give away all whatever's left then. And but in between those times, we're going to be having a lot of fun. We're already, you know, I'm about to announce the schedule for week 19.
Okay. Is that
And
where we're at now?
I should have done it yesterday, but I'm behind. So we'll get it today. But that just shows you how far we've already gone, 19
Yeah. Wow.
weeks into this project. And of course, there's 50 some weeks to the year, so we have plenty to go. But if you haven't, it's very easy. Just go that day. You notice the schedule and where it is, watch the schedule. And if we have one that day, you just go to the location, the host location, get a ticket. You can wait right up to the minute of the drawing if you want, or you can get one early. You just have to remember the drawing's at a certain time. Be there just before that happens with your ticket. And if your number is drawn, you win.
And how do
We
they find the schedule?
It's on our Facebook page and Instagram. Sapulpa's Great Route 66 giveaway.
Okay.
A very easy page to follow, and we're updating it weekly with where things are going. We have a new type of giveaway we're about to add, a little bit of a mystery to where, because we have these groups that are coming through, tourist travelers and that,
Hmm.
but they don't have a really set schedule. And so to help appeal to them more, we're looking at a thing where we're going to say, we're going to do one this day, but we're not going to announce the time until maybe an hour before.
Okay.
So you really have to watch the Facebook page then, because, we'd like to give these guys a chance. And since their schedule varies day to day, we're going to float with them and try to accommodate them. It still doesn't mean you can't come in a ticket, but
You really
you
have
have
to
to
be
pay more
wanting.
attention.
Okay. All right. Well, go ahead and get signed up now so you can start sticking with it
Yeah, the one
when they
today
make the
is
change.
set at 11 o'clock.
Okay,
So
so we'll be heading to that after we get done here, guys. Be sure to go follow the Facebook page for Sapulpa's Great Route 66 giveaway to get all the details you need on that. And again, we're in week 19, but you're going to continue doing it all year long, right? So,
52 weeks in the year.
okay, so yeah, be sure to go get your own little piece of Route 66 to take home with you. It's been a great project. You guys have had folks from around the world now that have taken home
Oh,
pieces
it's
of
been
Sapulpa's Route
fascinating.
66.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and we also had one that someone won to donate to a Chevrolet collectors group that's going to auction it off at their annual meeting in Rapid City this summer.
wow,
We had one young girl win one, and then she turned around and gave it to her grandfather because he grew up on Route 66 and was, you know,
that's
so many
awesome.
treasured stories like
Yeah,
that. We've
sounds
had
good.
we've had winners from as far away as Sydney, Australia, and a town called Worms, Germany, and then we had some so close that the next door operator to Sapulpa Main Street won. So it's been fabulous and fascinating and so much fun to do this project and see where everything's going.
Well, it's such a great idea, and it's open to everybody who wants to participate. So you guys be sure to go do that. Again, go out to Amazon, find the Great Beckoning book 1 and 2. They're all available now. Hopefully, we're going to see you guys at all the different events for Route 66 and Main Street and all these other organizations that are happening down here. So we're going to end it there, guys. Thanks for tuning in to the special edition of the Time Loop. I'm sure we're going to have Kirby back to talk about the next big thing that he's doing because I'm sure he never rests. He seems like he's always involved in something. So Kirby, thanks again for coming
Thank you
and
for
being
having
a
me.
part of this. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. But anyway, so we're gonna go to the giveaway and go check out the Historical Society Museum. Hopefully, we'll see you guys there and have a great rest of the day, everybody. Take care.
Take care.
Bye bye.